Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Cast Dice, the podcast that explores the great big wild world of tabletop gaming that exists today. It's been said once or twice, mainly on this podcast, that we are in the middle of a gaming renaissance. There are just too many good games that we can spend our hobby time and our hobby dollars on, and it can lead to a serious case of not knowing what to play next. And that's the purpose of this podcast. It's to dig into the games that my guests and I enjoy playing, to talk about big industry events, and to talk to the people who create these games. Now, I have been talking to a lot of people about events that have been happening in and around Australia, particularly around Bolt Action over the last couple of years. We like to support the local community here and talk about the great events that encourage people to come out and play and grow the Bolt Action scene. Because for many of us, going to events is that opportunity to get away from, the grind of daily life and to, guaranteed get 3 to 5 to 6, depending on the size of the event, guaranteed games in with people who are generally as passionate about these things as we are. Competitive aside, just, you can find like-minded gamers. You can see brand new armies that you might be inspired by. And hey, the most important thing, you can have fun. But I thought it would be important to reach out and to talk to an old friend about an event, in fact, 2 events that have happened across the pond in the UK, because we often talk about the UK meta. We talk about the US meta. But I thought it would be a good time to reach out to talk about one of the big Warlord events, but also to talk about a really cool, innovative event structure that we may be using possibly in Melbourne at some point next year, that is brought to us by one of my oldest gaming friends. Now, if we're bringing on one of, in fact, probably my first friend in Australia, even though he's across the planet now, and if we're going to talk about one of the founding, if not pretty close to founding members of the gaming club that adopted me when I moved here and turned me into the gamer that I am today, of course, I must be talking about our good friend, Al Unicomb. Al, welcome back to Cast Dice. How you doing, brother?
I'm always really humbled by your fantastic intros, as a lot of your guests are, the way you talk them up, because then I was wondering, it was like, has he got somebody else that he's recording this podcast with tonight? But no, Brad, look, it's a real pleasure to be back with you.
Brother, let's talk about the bona fides, because you've got a few. You are the WTC Scottish captain, or you have been over the last couple of years.
I am.
You
that's correct.
Are a huge member of the UK Bolt Action community.
I am.
You, particularly up north, in the Scottish section of it.
Mm-hmm.
You have won many upon many painting trophies across a ton of game systems. You have your own Blood Bowl podcast that I'm sure we'll be plugging at some point shortly.
At some point we will.
Without a fail. In fact, why don't we do that now? Al, please tell us about your podcast, because it is awesome.
Well, it's the other gaming passion I've got outside of Bolt Action is Blood Bowl. And myself and my friend Phil Cairns, our podcast is called 2 Guys, 1 Dice Cup. We've been recording now. I think we released episode 30 about a week ago, and it was one of those beautiful things that starts off during lockdown, as a reason for myself and Phil to stay in touch. I mean, we're good friends, but we needed to stay in touch anyway. And so we thought, well, why not put a little bit of structure to it, record it. And 30 episodes later, we've been really consistent in our recordings, and our number of listeners grows, quite steadily, month on month. So that's awesome. It's an easy format.
Yeah,
mostly focused at the beginners.
30 is a huge milestone. They say that 21 times of doing anything makes it habit forming, and it's often the case that podcasts don't make it past episode 7. I read an article about how to podcast years ago, and they said if you can make it past episode 7, you are more likely to succeed in the long run. And you guys have clearly passed that 4 times over.
Yeah.
Again, it's just a wonderful format and it's a great show. And if folks are interested in Blood Bowl, 2 guys, 1 dice cup, you should listen to it. It's good stuff.
Yep. And as I said, the focus is on beginners. The main body of it is called the rookie coaches section.
Mm-hmm.
And each episode, if it's an episode we're reviewing a team, myself and Phil talk about tournament rosters, we talk about league rosters, and the rosters that we make, we never show each other them beforehand. So whenever we record, we tell each other the rosters, we get the live reaction. And sometimes we are so completely different, and sometimes it is usually me that does something absolutely wild and it just gets shot down. But it's an enjoyable podcast, and look, I'd be lying if I said I didn't talk about bolt action quite a bit on it. So it's something we're always going to grow in the future, Brad, and it's good times.
Exactly. And as someone who honestly hasn't played Blood Bowl in years and yet has the new edition on my shelf and really need to play again, I've listened to quite a few of your episodes and enjoyed it, even though I haven't played Blood Bowl maybe the last 3 editions. But it's still a great listen. So
good. I'm glad.
But now we're not here to talk Blood Bowl. We are here to talk bolt action. And though you do talk bolt action on your show, and I do enjoy when you do, you are a bolt action monster. Like, you, not in a like scary way, but you are the complete package. You're a beautiful painter. You're a competitive player, and not in the way that, some people might say, oh, I don't want to play that guy. You know your business. But
Yep.
you're also able to play someone and have them enjoy the game and play in a way that will win the game quite regularly, which I have always enjoyed about you as a player. But you also work really hard to build your local scene. So in my eyes, and I am embarrassing you here, I know, you're kind of the total package of bolt action in Scotland. I love it. So that is why you are here today.
Thank you, Brad.
Because I want to talk about 2 events. But the
Yes.
first one I want to talk about is your event. And as a lover of 80s toys, I can't go past the name. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about Megatron 3000.
I love when other people say the name of the event. It just makes me smile so much. When you're
I have a bolt action size Megatron on the back shelf over there, buddy. So
I know you do.
whenever you
I
want
know
to
you
get
do.
Weird War, I'm ready.
It's just with so many events having some, operation, insert generic term here. I just needed something different. I just needed something palate cleansing and fun. And I've told the story a few times to people, but the name originates from when I think it was like 2017, 2018 on the east coast of the US. There was these huge winter storms that were just smashing New York, the whole eastern seaboard, and they were always called, Storm David, or Grace, or Kelly, or some rubbish like that.
Yes.
And I remember there was I don't know if it was like CNN or Fox News interview, that the wind was howling and they were interviewing some guy out in the streets of New York, and we're asking him, it's like, why are you not taking shelter? And the guy was insistent. It's like, oh, look, these storms are nothing to worry about. Storm David, he doesn't scare me. But, if you tell me that the Megatron 3000 is coming, I'll get out of there. And that always just sat really well with me. And I thought, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to have to use that somewhere. And that's where the Megatron 3000 came from.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Now, Megatron 3000 is actually something you want to go to, not run from. It is a
Precisely.
bolt action tournament format that is really, as I said before, something original and special. It uses the typical format and turns it on its ear. A lot of events these days say you must only use reinforced platoons. And so you can't often use all of the wonderful theater selectors that appear in all of the campaign books, all of the theater books that Warlord has put out over time, which means it turns off a huge number of unit options in the game and gets rid of a lot of theater selectors that really do make the game interesting. Now, when the game first came out, obviously a lot of people talked about, oh, theater selectors aren't balanced. And the one that everyone talks about is CeeLo Heights. And I've done it. because you can take 2 tanks in a Soviet army in 1 platoon. But you have embraced the theater selector for this. But I think you've proven that you can do it in a way that isn't necessarily abusive and is encouraging for all kinds of players. Can you talk to us a little bit about the format of how this works, and then how that encouraged different types of players?
The approach to Megatron 3000 was to utilize theater selector only. And again, the motivation for this came from one of the local players that I know. And he asked me he was just mouthing off one day. It's like, why do we even bother buying these books, these campaign books? We never get to use them. And that sat in the back of my head for a long time. So Megatron 3000, the format was each player could bring 1 single theater selector. Only theater selectors could be selected or chosen from the campaign books. So any theater selector in an army book was ruled out. So the focus was very much on all the expansion books. The biggest adjustment was that once a theater selector was chosen, then that was it. It was off limits to everybody else. So there was only ever going to be one of your army there. And when I started this process, I thought I had an okay knowledge of theater selectors within the campaign books, and it turns out that as people started to select them, I went to, I've got all the books, I went to look at it, and some of them are just like, wow, you've really dug deep to find this one. The target, it was 1,250 points. I put a dice cap on of 18 order dice. 18 order dice at 1250 is it's a good number. I've played in a lot of, events at that points level, and you tend to find that the best armies are around 18 order dice. And it was also a safety net for myself with that lack of knowledge of what was in the theater selector vortex. I didn't want anything jumping out crazy, and it's a good thing I did, because there is a Japanese theater selector out there. I think it's an Empire in Flames, where you can actually take unlimited numbers of inexperienced militia units. They're not 0 to 6. You can take as many as you like until you run out of points. So I'm glad I nipped that in the bud. That could have been a little bit wild. But those were the key principles, that once a selector was taken, that's it, gone. So if there was one that was uber powerful, you're only going to have one of it.
Yeah. And as a tournament organizer, that would help drive. I mean, one of the big problems we have as tournament organizers sometimes is nailing people down early in the process. So you have a hard idea of numbers so that you're able to provide, trophies, prizes. You have a budget to work with. Because we as gamers, sometimes it takes a little time to get us to sign up for things and then to get ready, and people wait till the last minute. But by having this and getting in, and the first person to get a selector gets it, and that's it, that drives people to register early.
This really did drive ticket sales. I think I'd sold 20 tickets within 7 days. Exactly. Which was awesome. But within that, before the pack even went live, I realized that, from my own experience, whenever I'm going to a tournament, I'll buy the ticket, but I'll never really decide on what army I'm going to be taking until maybe a week before the list is due. And I'll know the nation. If it's going to be Germany, it'll be Germany, but I'll tinker and tweak the list, and I won't finalize it until I have to send it. And then I thought, whoa, hang on, man, I've just locked all these people into a theater selector. What happens if they change their mind? So I created what is now like some sort of weird cultural phenomenon called the admin fee. And, I think in Australian currency, it's like $5. It's the price of an okay coffee. So for a non-refundable admin fee, a player could change their selector. And it stopped people. For whatever reason, I thought, it's like, what happens if somebody picks a selector with no intention of using it and then just sits on it to stop other people? But it's like, that could not have happened. Just there's so many selectors out there. But I wanted people to have a mechanism that they could change it, and that money went straight into the prize pool.
Brilliant.
To help with everything that you said, with trophies and helping sponsors and different prizes and stuff. And I had no idea if the admin fee would be popular. And for some of the Megatron players that went, how popular it ended up being. Some of you guys just had money to burn. Crazy kids.
Well, hey, that just supported the event, right? And brought home a better event for everyone. So that's awesome.
Really did. It was great.
Now, with that, if someone changed theater selectors, and I've heard you speak about this format on Bo's awesome bolt action listing YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
But a question I have is, if a player switched, I assume the one that they'd used previously went back onto the block, so to speak, so other people could use it?
100%, yep. So if they released a selector, it went back into the pool for players to choose. And, it's really admin heavy,
I can imagine.
Keeping up to date with the selectors and keeping the player list up to date so that people could see who's attending the event, what's the name of their selector, what publication is it from, what page is it from, what page number is it on. But on the flip side of that, it gives people later on an idea of what armies are going to turn up, so they can see what's looking popular, what's not, and we got a huge spread. And I think the final result, the top 5 players had selectors from 5 different books.
Yeah,
there was nothing in common with any of them.
That's awesome.
It was really cool. And when I put the tournament pack out there, I didn't mention the words competitive, historical, or beginner. It was just event. And I saw the usual competitive faces there that I battle against, every month. I saw the historical faces from the different sort of historical groups around Scotland. I saw some of them there. And I saw faces that I hadn't seen for a long time. Players that, during lockdown or after lockdown had drifted to other systems. They decided to have a go to come back. And then there was the newer players, the beginners. I made them all put their hand up, and I think there was like 7 or 8 players who had never been to a bolt action tournament before, ever, out of a field of the final number was 28, if I remember. The usual dropouts happened. Like, we had 36 tickets sold live, and that's how it is. So all these different players mingled, played, had a good time, and we generated what I called on the day a clean result. I didn't need to use a tiebreaker until I got down to like 21st or 22nd place, and even then the tiebreaker was just a quick order dice count. It was really smooth. So yeah, couldn't be happier with the event. And I suppose this is the odd one. It's the point scoring system within the event that was also different. And I really hope I remember it. I hope I do. No, it was 5 points.
You had
5 points for a win, 3 points for a draw, 1 point for a loss.
Yeah.
So that seems quite normal. But then on top of that, there was the classic secondary objective on every table, and that was worth 2 points. Killing your opponent's HQ was worth 1 point, and keeping your own HQ alive was worth 1 point. So even for players that were going to lose the mission, they still had things to fight for. If they managed to get the secondary objective, kill their opponent's HQ, keep their own alive, then they're going to walk out of there with 5 points for a loss.
Exactly. 1
for losing, 2 for the secondary, and then 1 each for the bonus. So 5 points for a loss. That it always meant that there was a reason to keep fighting, to keep playing, just to scrape those extra battle points, and it proved fantastic. I was happy with it.
I want to talk a little bit about that, because we don't use the secondary objective here, but it is something you commonly see in a lot of events in the UK. Can you explain that for folks who may not be familiar with what that means? So
Of course.
regardless of the mission that you're playing, there is a secondary objective placed on the
Yeah.
table. How does that work as far as placement, who places it, and what's determined as that, if that makes sense?
Well, look, the secondary objective, it's usually a poker chip. So it's easily identifiable on the table, and it'll be something very different from what your normal in-game objectives will look like, and it's placed by the tournament organizer. Traditionally, it will be placed somewhere on the center line of the table, so that it's quite neutral in its sense. Obviously, that does change though, if depending on the mission. So if it's something like sectors and it's a quartz deployment, that can adjust the game. But I would say 90% of the time, there's no great issue with where the secondary objective is placed. Some players, some sort of tournament organizers, they'll treat it more as a tiebreaker.
Yeah.
So if, regardless of your win, loss, draw, whoever got the most secondaries during the course of a day, that would be your first tiebreaker. And then it would come down to maybe order dice. The secondary objective is claimed just the same as any other objective is, with an infantry unit or artillery unit. So there's no real difference there. And it's just an extra element to the game. But as I said, it's predominantly used as a tiebreaker, whereas I decided to make it an actual pivotal thing within the game. And for myself, on the morning, it was a 3-game event. I went round every table, and I had some, I'm sure that the term crosses over oceans and borders, but blue tack, the stuff you put your posters up, and blue tacked each poker chip to the table so that it couldn't be easily bumped or moved or manipulated. It was stuck reasonably there. So yeah, that was that.
Is that like gluing a penny on the ground and watching people try and pick it up?
Kind of like that.
Kind of like
that. Yeah.
We, I mean, you would know this as someone who played with me in 40K events here for many years. For years, we used a format in Melbourne that was, for events, we called it, that getting a 20, which, there were 20 points on offer in each round in an event. Winning would get 15 points. Tie would get 10, loss would get 5. And then there would be 5 additional bonus points that you would build up. It was often used by Arcanicon, for example, the big Australian event.
Yeah. If I can remember it, it was you had to get somebody into one of your opponent's flanks beside the deployment zone, destroy their killer HQ, kill their highest point unit. Was there something about claiming the center as well?
It was like you had to have a certain number of things. And that's where my memory goes.
I'm sure, the last 2 points, I'm sure you had to be something like have nothing in your enemy deployment zone or nothing in your deployment zone. But there was...
Yeah. Well, Anthony from the old Ghost Army podcast brought that system to Melbourne events. I do want to give him the credit for that, because he was the one who said we should have more points to help, differentiate scores for the final scoring for events. And over the years, we played with it. And currently, what we're using for a lot of the big Melbourne events, like Jump to Action, Operation Bear, Easter Front, is the 5, 10, 15, which is similar to yours, just with slightly bigger numbers. It just, slightly more granular, I guess. Same idea, though, mathematically. But we have 5 objectives as well. I mean, 5 additional points you can score for the very same reason that you say. And I'm saying this only for folks who aren't here and aren't there, to share different ideas if you are running an event that might give you some additional points. So we have you killed your opponent's lieutenant? So captured theirs. Have you finished 5 full turns of your game? So it encourages people to play through.
That's good. Didn't think of that. That's a good idea.
Do you have 2 units in your opponent's half of the board? So it's just encouraging people to get out of their own deployment zone. Did you destroy more than half of your opponent's order dice? And do you have more than half of your own order dice? So even for objective missions, for those people who do like to play a little bit more aggressively, it might give them something that would reward their style of play, if that makes sense, because we tend to use a lot of objective missions. We do have kill point missions, obviously. There's usually one per every 3 mission, and then the other 2 are objective based. So it gives people an incentive. It also helps people when they're facing those larger order dice armies that often have larger order dice armies often have those easy to peel away order dice because they have lots of cheap ones. And it gives people an opportunity to get those points, if that makes sense. So yeah, same idea. But for those of us who are thinking about running events in the future, those are just 2 ideas that you can run with. Now, I do want to get back to Megatron. And for just an episode that I was recording for the Warlord cast yesterday, spoilers, I am holding a stack of books. And most of these are theater selectors and campaign books. And I did love when you were on Bo's show talking about how important it is to have the actual book in hand, because while Easy Army and while Battle Scribe are wonderful resources for the community, and they have improved dramatically over time, I did have to say I found 2 list mistakes that caused new players to play incorrectly, for no fault of their own. They just didn't know. Because they weren't necessarily referring to the book. They were referring to what was on the bottom of Easy Army. And guys, you need to own the books. And otherwise, if you're going to be running an event like Megatron 3000, because it really is specific, the rules and the interactions and the list options, right?
Yeah, that's where the magic of the Megatron format really comes in, is that as you start to access all these selectors, they're really cool special. Actually, before that, it's giving credit to the authors of these books, especially the ones in the recent sort of 2 to 3 years. These guys have done their research, and that, the first parts of the books with the scenarios and the historical elements of the campaigns that they're talking about, they're really, really good. They're worth the read. If you're not a World War II buff, you can be by reading these campaign books. When it comes to the theatre selectors, they've done the research, and that the access to the vehicles and the squads and the units they have in them, that's what they had. For sure, it's still a game. There's still a bit of sort of leeway to that, but there's always a limiting factor, and people sort of curl their toes up when they hear about competitive play and the M3 Stuarts with all the machine guns or the flamethrower units coming out your ears, multi-launcher madness, just firing stuff everywhere. All of that was limited within the theatre selectors that you encountered at Megatron. There were no upgun Stuarts. There were multi-launchers, but there was only ever one running about. There were flamethrowers, yep, for sure. But I don't think any army had more than 2. So all those elements were there, but they were controlled through the history of it. And that's a credit to the authors. Thank you for those works. And the next part is then the extra rules that come with them all. And it was so good to see experienced players finding out new things about different armies, and that included myself. Off the top of my head, from the Stalingrad book, no step back beyond the Volga or something. I can't remember who it was, but they weren't allowed to take any artillery pieces within their army, because within the city of Stalingrad, you didn't just sort of roll around with a medium howitzer, whatever you want, and just, start firing. But the rule it gave them was that if you take a artillery forward observer, they can fire twice.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And then remembering you got to combine that with the Soviet rule of rolling 2 dice for the distance of the artillery bombardment. So all those things married together and gave that guy a really unique experience playing Soviets. And there's just countless little things like that were going on all over the battlefield. all over the day. It was really good. I loved it.
Yeah, man. And it gives people a new way to look at and play bolt action, because we may know the rules. We may be familiar with the quote unquote better units. I mean, bolt action is a game that is really fun to play. It's my favorite game. Don't get me wrong. It is also a game that's easily broken at times. But when you are asking people to look at the game 30 different ways by taking different theater selectors, yeah, there's going to be a lot of crossover as far as, you know, what works and what may not. But because those theater selectors, as you say, are focused in particular directions, it can lead to some really interesting army builds. And as you say, a lot of, particularly the newer theater selectors, have those special rules, and that can really help people to have a new gaming experience and to mix up their bolt action experience, so it's not just the same old thing every time.
And one of the keys to that was the points level. 1250 let people really maximize what was within it. You know, I had to write a list for myself in case I needed to be the spare man. And I picked the theatre selector called Bloody Gulch. From memory, it's from the D-Day US sectors. And the story behind that was there's a particular infantry division are pinned down, and they're waiting for the second armor division to come to the rescue. And so there's almost two elements to the army. And the trick for Bloody Gulch is that you can take 3 tanks, but from memory, you've only got a choice of 3 different tanks. One's a Sherman, I think it's a Wolverine or something else. So I picked 3 Shermans, and they've got the weak sides, easily catches fire. They're the cheap versions. But I still got to play with the army, through some practice games. So I still got to put down 3 Shermans, but I didn't have any multi-launchers. I didn't have any flamethrowers. I just had American infantry boys with rifles and bars. I had a couple of the guys with parachutes. Paratroopers.
Airborne?
Airborne, yeah. I had 2 squads of airborne, kitted out with a bunch of submachine guns and rifles, so they were veteran, tough fighter. And that was it. But I got 3 Shermans on the board, but I had to always conform to a rule that they could not deploy, because the second armored rolled up, partway through a battle. To represent that, they were always in reserve. So that was my, pro and con for it. And I think exploring the theatre selectors is essential. And the plan is for next year, I'm going to run Megatron 3000 again, and it will be exactly the same format. There might be one tweak. Actually, I'll sneak it out on your podcast, mate.
Do it. Bring it. Bring the hotness. Give us the hot take.
I had a few little house rules thrown in just to help balance things out. One of them was that the Italians would always get their defensive position barricades. I asked that any army from the Stalingrad book could not take Panzerfausts because they didn't exist at that point in time. It's just one of those quirks where the campaign book references you back to the army books, to a unit in the army book, and that's when you can take the Faust. So I said no to that. Nobody kicked up a fuss about that at all. I am going to go back and ask for the Tiger Fear rule to be used as written in the German army book, with the exception that it is only on the Tiger 1 or Tiger 2 tank.
Yes, there you go. I like it. My friend Nick, who runs a Tiger 2, since they've FAQ'd the Tiger 2, has not played bolt action because he wants Tiger Fear, because his entire army depends on it. And so, so I would encourage people to play again, right?
Yeah, we had Tiger tanks at the first Megatron. They were there. But just as a little sweetener, the Tiger 1 and the Tiger 2 at the Megatron 3000 in 2023 will have Tiger Fear rules as written. So, that's an exclusive for your podcast.
I love it, man.
Should that be cool?
Oh, as someone who loves running a Tiger, particularly because I often end up running Gumby lists or the odd man out list as the tournament organizer at events, because I'm often running them. I often love taking a tiger because it takes up a lot of points. You have lower order dice. You get through games faster, so you can get to doing tournament organizer stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, as someone who loves
Yep.
taking a tiger, it would certainly help.
Yeah.
Al, we could talk about Megatron all day, and
Yep.
I literally have like another 6 questions, but
Yep.
I'm hoping to run a Megatron 3000 in Melbourne next year. And I was talking with Lee off air over the week about how that could work. So again, we will stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, because I think this format is rad, and we might just see global Megatron 3000 in 2023.
What I would like to do, though, is before we move on to our next topic,
yes,
Megatron 3000 was successful for the players, the pack, the venue, which was Common Ground Games in Stirling. But what really made it special as well was the sponsors, and I got to deliver a prize, or a package of prizes into the hands of every single player that attended. So I made a commitment to my sponsors to give them some good exposure, so they got value from it. And for the community that has listened to this will be the last time I will mention them in relation to Megatron 3000 2022.
It is important that we thank these people, though, right? Because they have gone out of their way to support our community. And it's also for those of you who are listening from the United States and Australia, because I know looking at the demographics and analytics for the show that a lot of you are, some of these people who are supporting UK events are wonderful manufacturers of products that you may not be aware of. So listen carefully, ladies and gents, because there's some good stuff in here. I've heard this on another show, and it's a great list of sponsors.
And I should say, the UK-based retailers, with the current state of financial markets and currencies, it could be worthwhile you actually going to shop there, because your dollars will go further against our pounds. But in no particular order, we had sponsorship from Great Escape Games. They sent a whole bunch of Metal Italian miniatures and other miniatures for a welcome bag. A company called 3D Printing Valley. Again, you can obviously tell by the name, 3D printed different tanks and troops. They gave us a whole bunch of vouchers, very, very kind. Goblin Gaming, a UK online retailer. Alba Studio, they're based in Aberdeen in Scotland. They are a 3D printing and commission painting service. Highly, highly recommend them. GamerMat AU, they gave us a battle mat for our table prizes. Micro Art Studio, these guys are based out of Poland. You'll start to see a lot of their product. They do pre-painted MDF terrain, buildings and some such.
They look great
too. Really good quality. I bought some alongside the sponsorship arriving, and it's really cool. KO Design, they came out of Scandinavia. They do some dice bags for us. Dice of War, a very, very well-known name down in Australia. I was really impressed that they sent product over to us, especially with, as they said, their market in the UK started to drop. So thank you for sticking with us. Rubicon, the brand name for us. Don't need to say any more about it. Another Scottish company called Any Scale Miniatures. They're a 3D, they're a resin casting company as well. The key sponsor for us, Weldon Tabletop Wargaming, UK retailer of bolt action products and others. He provided an army box for the first prize, plus additional stuff. So Weldon Tabletop Wargaming, awesome. I cannot thank them enough. And it was only this morning that I was speaking to them, and they're going to sponsor us again next year. So again, that's another little exclusive for the Megatron 3000 in 2023. Phenomenal stuff. We had Warlord Games themselves were a sponsor. Was very happy to receive their sponsorship package through their new regime via Marcus Vine. So thank you very much for that. And First Core, again, a huge name and miniatures in the UK. And they sent First Core. They said it was a tiny little package, and then it must have been like the TARDIS in there. I opened it up, and all these bags of metal miniatures just started spewing out. It was absolutely
Mhm.
terrifying.
That's
And I
awesome.
really, when I held it, I was like, oh, it's a bit heavy. And then they just packed it so that all the miniatures were just lying super flat. And then they just
Mhm.
started pouring out, and it was really cool. So First Core were a great sponsor as well. And thank you for that. And you know what? I can scrunch that list up, and I'll start a new one for next year. Awesome.
Love it. Love it. Well, I have to say, Anyscale is one of those underrated companies, and they sponsored Easterfront for us earlier this year.
Oh, did you? Did
They
they?
are a
Brilliant.
wonderful company, and I have a ton. Recently, people have been asking me where I got, because I have a couple of wrecked torches that I use on my tables at events.
Yep.
They do awesome wrecked variety of trucks and tanks from a bunch of different nations, but they also do the non-wrecked version, and they tend to be inexpensive. And there's some great stuff in there. Also, if you're looking for some weirder vehicles that you don't see every day, like the otter or the kangaroo, or if you're looking for a good Lancia truck, if you're an Italian player, mate, they make them and they're great.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, big fan.
Any scale of as I said, they're based in Paisley in Scotland, if I've
Mm-hmm.
done my research correctly. And yeah, he was really forthcoming. I've had good communication with him, and you know what? I will let
Mm-hmm.
it fly again. Any scale miniatures are sponsoring Megatron 3000 again next year as well. Got
Awesome.
got to stop talking about it. There'll be no surprises left.
Exactly. Well, I do love an exclusive, Al. You know that.
Well,
But
I've given you
speaking of
enough.
Warlord Games and speaking of Marcus, the man
Yes.
is the new event coordinator for Warlord Games. And he is the face of Warlord for a lot of UK events. And you might know his name as being the guy who writes a lot of the articles for Warlord Games community page. But he has taken on a new role. As I said, as the Warlord Games coordinator of events, and he ran the Scottish Open on September 24th and 25th of this year, which was the Warlord Games big event. And it was at Nightly Games, if I'm getting that right now?
That's correct. Nightly Games. It's it's been open for a few years now. It's in a town called Bathgate, but it's very
Mm-hmm.
much what we describe as the central belt of Scotland. It's got really good transportation and connection to get there, and they have honestly, mate, they've got 3 floors of gaming, and the floor we were on, I think it's got a capacity for at least oh easy 75 players. And then they've got 2 other
Wow.
floors. It's a phenomenal. It's something that's they're still building it. It's still a growing business. But on the day, we shared the venue space with the. Oh, look, I like to refer to them as the Hobbit people, but the Middle Earth strategy battles. I like the
Mm-hmm.
Hobbit people.
The
The
Hobbit
Hobbit
people.
people were there. Yeah, the Hobbit people were there. So we were, the two events combined, I think we were like 50 players, and we
Mm-hmm.
barely took up half the space on one floor. It was pretty special. So yeah, nightly gaming is a growing concern in the Scottish gaming community. But
That's
yes, this
awesome,
was
man.
it's super cool. It's really good.
Now, of that 50 players, you had some pretty big names if you are paying attention to the quote unquote WTC competitive bolt action circuit. So, I mean, we had some heads of teams. We had some of the quote unquote better players from a variety of nations. Can you talk to us a
Yep.
little about the field? Because it wasn't just that, it was a wide spectrum of players, but you also had people traveling to this event, right?
That was it. So we had, I think it was just under 20 players after dropouts and things happened. That's just
Yep.
how tournaments happen.
Mm-hmm.
But we had one of the WTC players from Denmark, a guy called Jan
Mm-hmm.
Peterson, came over. He's a good
Mm-hmm.
friend of Scotland. He plays, he's actually played for Scotland at the WTC before in our second team. And then the last WTC, he captained Denmark's second team, and one of the Scottish players joined them. So we've Scotland and Denmark have got a huge relationship when it comes to bowl action now.
Mm-hmm.
Based on strong friendships, which is myself and Bo, we do a lot together.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really nice to have Jan with us. The Welsh captain, gentleman by the name of Paul Wickens was in attendance as well.
Mm-hmm.
He came up for the weekend. He's on some crazy tournament binge at the moment. I think after the Scottish Open, he had 4 more events before the end of the year. It's like, I don't know where he finds the time.
Right?
Yeah, good luck. Good luck to him.
Yeah, exactly.
And then locally, we had the bulk of our sort of international sort of team were there. Plus, the I would call them the hardcore. The dedicated gamers were in attendance. I think there's still a thing that this might be an offshoot of COVID and lockdown and restrictions, but attendance at 2-day tournaments is still really quite edgy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's people are still not willing to give up a lot of their personal time that they might. It's an odd one. It's an odd one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, it was good to see so many familiar faces, and a handful of faces I hadn't seen before. But it was pretty much a who's who of Scotland, and with some foreign visitors who are always welcome.
Nice. Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about what the event's rules were, because people often ask. So the event listing rules for this were each player had brought 1,000 points. It had to be a single generic reinforced platoon. They had to be made up of units from the Armies of book, or where the units specifically say that they can be included in generic reinforced platoons within an FAQ or the relevant theater or campaign book. There are a lot of campaign books where people look at units and say, yeah, cool, I can use that in a generic reinforced platoon. Nah. They need to specifically say that, or it needs to be listed in an FAQ. Brian Cook, for example, is very good in, for example, the Budapest book, saying explicitly and specifically which units go into generic reinforced platoons and which ones are specifically for only mission play. So that is one of the requirements for this event. A force may not include more than 2 flamethrowers. It may not include more than 1 multi-launcher, and it may not include more than 16 order dice. All models had to be painted to the 3 color minimum, and they had to be fully based. All models had to be WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. There are no counts as proxy models, no special characters, legendary tanks, or war correspondents. That's one of those things that no one likes a war correspondent. And you have to be using the most recent Warlord FAQ. All army lists must be sent to Marcus, blah, 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 which is something you are used to. Now, there were a couple special rules here. Tiger Fear will not be used. Turret Jam will not be used. And prep and preliminary bombardment will also not be used. Al, as someone who plays in a lot of the Warlord open style events, I was not surprised by seeing this list of guidelines for this event. Were you?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, open type events, I haven't really gone to in the past, because I know that like the goal for for an open event is that it's more beginner friendly. There are limits put on people, but we all like going to tournaments, events to play games. So I'll play pretty much within any sort of format. So the restrictions on listing is actually really good. I prefer single platoon, just because it brings in some of the other nations that drop away quite quickly when there's dual platoon. What did surprise me though was the dropping of the preliminary bombardment from all missions. I just looked at it and I had this moment of, why are Warlord games dropping Warlord games rules? But look, as it turned out, and it's best to put it in now, I think we were being experimented upon by Warlord games to see what the results of the games would be without the use of prep bombardment. And you know what? I don't care. It was just a bit of a surprise.
Yeah.
A little bit, a few things that are going to go on. Are you going to talk about the objectives? Is that still something you
I
want to talk
will in a
about?
sec. Yeah.
Yeah,
But feel
when
free
you
to talk. Yeah.
no, when you know, because they had some specific objective rules that surprised me, and I think if you want to do the reading on that just now, I'll
I
jump in.
will. I want, before I got to that, I guess in Melbourne and in a lot of big Australian events, we tend to use some rulebook missions, usually a couple, but typically we end up using other missions as well. And one of the first things to go out the window on a lot of those missions is prep and preliminary bombardment, because having played in an event earlier this year that used largely Warlord missions run by Andrew Baxter, I should give a big props to him because I really enjoyed playing in his event. It was really weird to play using them because I hadn't played with those rules in years, particularly because people often don't like them. It leads to negative play experiences because it isn't symmetrical. It often one person will get hit and the other person doesn't, and so we often do away with it. So I guess I just glossed over that when I read it and was like, yeah, it's fine. Like that's a standard thing. We don't do that. But I guess you guys do.
Yeah, dropping prep bombardment's a very non-standard thing to do.
Yeah,
But
I've played
actually,
in a game with preliminary bombardment exactly 3 times, I think, twice.
yeah.
Actually, now that I say it out loud, in maybe 4 years.
You
So,
only ever hear the real complaints from the British players though, so whatever.
with good reason. Yeah,
What
because it's part of their
ifs?
national rules. Yeah.
Exactly. And they'll cry about it. Anyway, back at the
Yeah,
back
but the
here.
British have plenty good rules. Anyway, let's talk about objectives. All objectives are required to be 40 millimeters, which isn't a surprise. Only infantry and artillery units may contest and hold objectives, which is fairly standard for us as well. Spotters, medics, chaplains cannot contest, and they cannot hold objectives. Infantry and artillery units in transports may not contest or hold objectives. Now, that's spicy. To contest an objective, an infantry and artillery unit must have at least one model within 3 inches of the objective marker. And to hold an objective, an infantry or artillery unit must have at least one model within 3, with no enemy or infantry or artillery unit within 3 of that objective marker. And each mission will have one secondary objective, which is what we talked about before.
Yeah.
Now, that will be worth 1 point if held at the end of the game. These objectives are placed by the TO at the start of the event and may not be moved. Basically, again, we're gluing the penny on the floor and watching people try and pick it up.
Yeah,
so,
pretty much.
Al, how is this different from what you guys do? Other than the transport rule, this is very much what we run in Australia regularly.
For us, you know what? To claim an objective, to actually have to claim it, infantry, artillery on foot, yes, but also infantry and artillery in a vehicle, yes.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
should be able to claim it. So that was a difference for us. The other one is vehicles not be able to contest it. That's huge. That's a huge change for any UK event. And I have never played in an event where a vehicle cannot contest an objective. So that was a big one, and I was really hoping that all the players at the event had read this. Because even when I went to start to build my list for it, I had that in mind. And that's what steered me towards the nation I played, and the list I chose was actually the 2 big changes: the removal of prep bombardment and not letting vehicles not letting vehicles contest objectives. Those were the 2 main drivers for the creation of my own list.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is a Bolt Action Alliance mission from the 2020 mission pack that allows vehicles to contest objectives, but it is explicitly written in that it allows that, and in no other mission that we run do vehicles contest. That's what makes that mission different, is because it does allow that. And so we always list the other way around, where infantry and artillery are king and vehicles are in addition. So it's, again, for me, looking at this, the transport thing's huge. I don't necessarily understand that one, but
No.
the vehicles otherwise, that's every
Yeah.
day for us.
Before we crack on even further into this, I want to caveat this section. This is a Warlord Games event, and it was really good.
Oh yeah, I'm about to. Next slide. Yeah.
Before anybody starts to think, oh, here's Brad and
Yeah.
Al winding up to
No,
lay the
not at
boot
all.
into Warlord Games, but these are just little quirks. This was a really, really good event.
And it gives us, again, just like you said, I'm not being critical. It gives us an interesting character for this event, and it makes it different than what you're used to. And I found it interesting reading through the pack when we were doing a little pre-event chit chat, just how much the way that R2 metas play bolt action is subtly different. Just that vehicle being able to contest an objective, that's massive. It changes a lot of the way people play and correspondingly list when getting ready for bolt action events.
Yeah.
And that's not something that people commonly talk about when they're talking about the UK meta, or if you're listening to a UK podcast, they may not be mentioning versus what I'm talking about on my show. It's just a really interesting, subtle difference. But Al, let's talk a little bit about the objectives in this. So, sorry, the winning. So we have the points. Now, just like your event, 5 points for a win, 3 points for a draw, 1 point for a loss. The secondary objective at this event was worth 1. And if you had a concession loss or a disqualification, you got 0 points. So the missions that you guys played, unsurprising because it is a Warlord event, were all out of the rule book. We had meeting engagement, we had point defense, key positions, sectors, and double envelopment. Now, as a player for this event, were you surprised to see those missions?
I was surprised. There was 2 missions out of there that I was surprised to see, and I'm not going to go through the guessing game. It was point defense and double envelopment. And obviously, being a Warlord Games event, they were all played rules as written from the rulebook. So seeing those 2 missions, that was really nerve-wracking stuff. And you know what, if I'm honest, I didn't see the missions until the day. I don't know if I'd skipped over it in the player pack or if I just tuned it out, but I never saw the missions until round 1 when Marcus had them written up. And when I saw when I saw point defense and double envelopment, I was just like, oh God, I've done it wrong.
Now, that said, and there's my segue, let's shift gears and talk about how the event went, because we've talked about how wonderful the venue is. We've talked about the character of the player pack and what that led to. We've talked about who was there. Now let's shift gears and talk about what was it like to play as a player who came in to play. And then clearly there were some challenging missions for you, and there were some slightly different rules for you to get your head around. But again, that made for an interesting, slightly different skew on what you are used to. Did you have fun at this event? Because, spoilers, I've heard good things.
Hugely enjoyable event. I was mentally drained 2 out of the 5 games that were played. And the other 3 games were challenging, but also, and they were all enjoyable.
Awesome.
One of the big elements of any event for bolt action is the terrain, just because it's such an integral part of the game itself. And the terrain for this event was supplied by Colin Betts. Colin Betts and Gary Betts are closely associated with Warlord, but they also do a lot of work through the British Historical Game Society, BHGS. So they have got a huge, stock, for lack of a better term, of terrain. And I know that Colin Betts drove a huge big van up, the night before, stacked full of tables, and every table was it was medium to high density in terms of numbers of terrain pieces, but all the tables were themed, and they were themed well. There was your sort of classic jungle airfield, the big strip down the middle, but then dense jungle on either side. There was just the classic jungle settlement type thing, again, really dense. Out in the desert, lots of roads, but hills and dunes and rocky gullies. A classic Stalingrad table where it was just dense cover, hard terrain, wall to wall everywhere.
Awesome.
Your nice little sort of Eastern European village or Western European village, whatever sort of you want to look at. With open roads, fields, but it was all good quality, well laid out, very high standard, and there were tables that I didn't want to play on, but that was because of the nature of my army, not the nature of the table. It was my army which gave me those, likes and dislikes of different tables, and I had to play on, two tables that I didn't want to play on missions that I didn't want to play. So I had to suck it up. It was good.
Yep. But that's important, right? That you have a variety of terrain types on tabletops, but also across an event, you have a variety of tables that allow for different styles of army to flourish, right? I mean,
Yes.
not every table should be the same. And, sometimes those tables that you don't want to face people on are exactly the table other people want to face you on.
And as long as the TOs can help players not play on the same table twice,
right,
where at all possible, then that should be fine. And I thankfully didn't play on any duplicate tables, which I'm very thankful for. And I'm glad I got to play on a variety of tables. I played on a nice desert table. There was a little Mediterranean village that I got to destroy. There was it looked like Eastern European village I got to destroy. I had to play in the Stalingrad table and the jungle airfield. Yep. And
That's awesome,
the
man.
cool thing is, they're all tables I would happily play on again. But I'd really hope I had the right army or a different army to use than the one that I did.
Now, folks may ask, what army did you take? And we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Yes.
Let's talk about the event runner, Marcus. I do not know the man. I've, again, heard wonderful things. I hear he ran a very tight ship on the day and things went well. Would you agree?
Yeah. The timing's sort of, it's a really weird thing. Within the event pack, how you've usually got your schedule, like registration at 9:30, first game at blah, 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 blah. It wasn't until the night before the event when I went to look in the player pack to find out, what time do I need to be at the venue. I know how quickly I can get to my door, to their door. I've been quite times. And that's when I realized there was no schedule. But I knew that, there was a sign that said, doors open at 8:30 a.m. I was like, all right, I'll just be there at 8:30 a.m. Registration was quick. It felt like we were playing game one really quickly, but I'd had enough time to get a coffee and chat to my sort of friends that were there and say hello to the Hobbit people. Yeah. And then all of us, they did a really, what I felt was odd, but was actually fine, that we did game two, then we had lunch. But I was okay with that. Yeah, it was weird, but I was okay. It was okay.
Yeah.
It was different, but I was fine with it. And then game three, and then all of a sudden, I had told my wife that I wouldn't be back until 7 p.m. But then all of a sudden I was walking through the door at 6 o'clock, and because I thought I wasn't going to be home for dinner, and it was really odd. Even my son's 3.5, and he was like, "Dada, what? You're not supposed to be home." So yeah, it all ran really slick, on time. There was a few. Was there? There were only 2 games where I had rules queries. There was one game in particular where I had multiple rules queries, but it was nothing sinister. It was a really intense game, and myself and my opponent were just a bit, let's get a consult on it.
Yeah.
But his rules calls were straight down the middle. He always checked the rule book in front of you and explained his reasoning behind it. And, did all calls go my way? No, but all calls were fair. So yeah, very, very happy. and there were no issues with redraws. You always felt like that you were facing the right opponent. So no, it was can't fault it.
That's awesome. Cool, man.
Especially when you get to go home to your family a little bit earlier than you thought, which is always good.
Exactly right. Yeah, better to be early than late. And
yeah, man.
Well, if you don't post the schedule, you can't be late.
Yeah, I know.
But it's also the Scotty syndrome, right? Under promise, over deliver. And it sounds like Marcus did exactly that, which is always good to see at an event.
Nah, boy did good.
Well, Al, spoilers, you did very well at this event. Do you want to talk about how your army went? I mean, I guess we'll get into that more when we talk about your actual army itself, but we are going to talk about the podium for this event, as in the top 4 lists, and what were some of the things that people saw. Before we get into those, do you think those 4 armies were representative of the lists on the day, or was it a more competitive side and maybe not so competitive lists were at another end? What was your feeling? Because I know that when I looked at some of these lists, I went, oh, yeah, that wouldn't fly here, because we have very different list expectations in Australia. And I know you and I talk about this regularly off air. What were these lists representative, or were these a more cutting edge of what was present?
No, they were all actually representative of what was there at the event. I mean, when you got down to maybe sort of towards the bottom end, there was probably some slightly less optimizations, but because you had the hard comp of 2 flamers, 1 multi-launcher, 16 order dice, 1,000 points. Well, not points isn't the hard comp thing. With those really those strong guidelines, you found that the armies were, all of equalish power. I think if we'll run through the 4 lists, or sorry, 3 or 4 lists that we've got. Then I'll talk about the 5 games in super brief generalities. But when I talk about the armies that I faced, you'll get a real feel for what they had, and how sort of they were all of more or less the same competitiveness. And look, to be fair, I think my army was probably the only outlier in terms of being a little bit quirky, if you want to give it that term.
Yeah. Well, let's start at the top, shall we?
Okay.
So this is the army that came first place.
Yeah. So the winning
order dice Soviet list. So who played this?
So first place was Paul Wiggins. So he travelled far and took out the win, and his total result was he was on 4 wins, 1 draw, and that took him to first, and he got first place by 1 point from second place. Yeah. So it was all very much down to secondary objectives and stuff.
So his list was an inexperienced junior lieutenant with 2 buddies, 2 6-man squads. Oh, sorry. Yeah, 2 6-man squads of body armor, flamethrower, assault engineers. We had a commissar, and then we had 2 12-man Strafbat squads, which are the Shirkers. We had the veteran, 10-man veteran Mongolian cavalry squad. We had the free rifle squad, an inexperienced heavy mortar, did not have a spotter. Oh, of course, you can't do that with the inexperienced mortar. A regular rifle team, 3 regular anti-tank rifles. We had the all machine gun all the time M3 Stuart light tank. And then we had a truck with no medium machine gun. And that was, as we said before, 15 order dice. What did you face this army on the day? And if so, you did. What was your experience with it, and any general thoughts?
It's a really good balanced competitive list that meets the restrictions. It's it's well thought out, and Paul is an excellent excellent player. The two squads of assault engineers, they're in the truck to deliver them, because with the body armor, they can't move any faster than 6 inches. This list and this event was ran under it wasn't the latest FAQ, so the latest FAQ that had just come out, a week ago, maybe by the time we're recording or something. It does the double pins for the shirkers for everything. We weren't using that FAQ on the day, just because there was a set cut-off date for FAQs, so the two shirker units were holding his back line, and we're cheap-ish dice to be there to get his objectives, as were the 3 anti-tank rifle teams. The machine gun Stuart, you're never going to go wrong with it. And the Mongolian cavalry were pretty much acting as a outflank sweeper. So no, when I looked at this list, I wasn't afraid of it at all. I was more afraid of Paul, because he's a really good player.
But
and
this list has the tools, right? Like,
yes.
You can see what it does. Looking through it, I could have told you that those assault engineers are in the truck. I could tell you that the Strafbat were there to hold objectives. I could tell you that, the Mongolian cavalry were there to zip around and to cause people havoc. Like, there's nothing particularly spicy or surprising here. But in the hands of a good player, this has the teeth, right?
Yep, it's a good toolbox list, and he knows what to do with it. So, yeah, it's the player that made the difference on this one. Things it was, though, it was nice not to see bomb dogs. God, they're so pedantic. So the 3 anti-tank rifles were really nice to see. And you've always got to remember that within the format, being single platoon, he's got to be confident that he's only ever going to face one sniper. So having multiple small teams run about and having his own sniper to counter it, he can maneuver these things about with relative safety.
Exactly. That's a good point.
So no, it was a good list, and it isn't on the scary list franchise, but the player is. Paul Wiggins. Wow.
And how did you go against this army?
I had to play key positions against it on a Stalingrad table, and it was, look, if I'll talk more about it when I sort of do a brief overview of my games, but I lost obviously against this list, but not by much.
Well, let's get into your list then.
Oh,
because you had a 14 order dice Romanian reinforced platoon.
Romania! Welcome to Romania, everybody.
The romantic Romanians.
Romantic Romanians.
I'll say what's in the list, and then you can talk about what it was like, why you did it. So we have a regular second lieutenant with an infantry buddy. 2 infantry buddies. You have 2 motorized squads, which is just 5 regular guys with a Panzerfaust. We have a combat pioneer section, which was a small squad, with a flamethrower and a bunch of SMGs. In fact, you had 2 of those. And then you had another motorized infantry squad, which was, again, 6 guys.
They're not small pioneer squads. One of them was 7-man, one of them was 8-man.
Oh, sorry. It's the format for Easy Army that throws me, because sometimes the way they list Panzerfaust throws me off. You're right. The 2 combat pioneer squads are larger. As you say, one is 7 and one is 8.
One is 8.
Right. Sorry about that. And both combat pioneer squads also have a Panzerfaust. We have an inexperienced medium mortar. We have a veteran sniper. We have a regular medium artillery piece. We also have a free regular medium artillery piece. Both have spotters. We have a slept-on tank that I always love, the Panzer 38T. Plus, we have 2 what are coined as miscellaneous trucks. And because they are from the Romanian book, they do not get the machine gun option from memory, and you didn't take them. And you also have listed as your German reinforced platoon a 3rd medium artillery piece, which
Oh yeah.
makes me sweat bullets to hear that you had 3 medium AT guns.
Ah,
Well, clearly the medium AT guns are the theme or are part of your, overall
medium
battle
howitzers,
plan.
mate.
But talk to
Medium
us about your
howitzers.
list. Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to take something drastically left field to this event, and because it was single platoon, I knew that I wasn't going to be facing off against multiple tanks and horrible multiple things. And then also with the provision of claiming and claiming objectives being infantry and artillery based, I wanted to make sure I had as many of those as possible. So a 3-man lieutenant team.
Yes.
So they all had submachine guns. The 2 5-man and the 1 6-man motorized infantry squad with rifles and 1 Panzerfaust. It's just spreading that not just anti-tank threat, but the sort of armor troop transport threat, spreading it throughout the entire army. The combat pioneers need to punch, and I want to punch twice. So 1 7-man, 1 8-man. 4 submachine guns in each squad, 1 Panzerfaust, 1 flamer. And also the way that they are sort of put together is that one of the trucks I've got had to be inexperienced, just a points pressure thing. So that meant that the 7-man pioneer squad went in that with the 3-man lieutenant squad. So if they were in reserve, the lieutenant could buff the truck and get it on.
There you go.
Yep. And then there's oh no, sorry, that's a lie. It's the 8-man squad. 8 plus 3 is 11, so they go in the inexperienced one. And then the 7-man squad and one of the 5-man motorized squads goes in the other truck to total 12. And then obviously, 3 medium howitzers, all with spotters, plus a sniper. So it meant that when it came to the forward deployment game, I could win pretty much to put my sniper down last. Again, within a single platoon, who's going to have more than 4 forward deployers? Nobody did, as it turned out, or nobody that I faced did. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
Well, you built your list knowing that you were playing the game within the game, because you knew that everyone was taking 1 single reinforced platoon.
Yes.
And you knew that would limit the repetition of certain options within a list. And then you intentionally built an army, the Romanians, that break that by allowing you to take 3 artillery pieces.
Yes, I did that. And also coupled with the fact that knowing that there was no prep bombardment in any mission, so that I could deploy these guns and not have them being blown up, again was a further encouragement to do it. So yeah, that was the rationale behind the list, and I had 4 wins and 1 loss with this.
Nice.
But I tell you what. When we talk about the games,
record in a minute.
I swear to you, it was not easy.
Oh yeah, no, looking at easy. Just the again, I often talk about lists as in the Australian meta and what we expect here. And these lists all make sense in conjunction with one another. Like it's the event that they're played in. They fit the event. They fit the community that they are a part of. And this list falls into line with Wiccan's list, I think, in my mind, perfectly. So it isn't like one list is going to curb stomp anyone else because it is so drastically different. I think everything is along the same lines. This isn't a list that we would expect for Bear. And in case you're listening, folks, please don't submit this list for Operation Bear later this year. And I am saying that because we have had people trying to turn in Juggernaut lists recently to beginner-friendly events in Melbourne, and it's like, sorry, buddy, no. Let's move to 3rd place. We have a Japanese army by Johnny Ferguson. Now, as a Japanese player, I always love to see a Japanese list, and this one was 15 order dice. We have a regular 2nd lieutenant with a buddy. We had 2 15-man inexperienced militia squads. Now, it's important to remember that those are green, And he backed that up with the Kempetai officer, which, of course, is like the Japanese version of the commissar, for those who aren't familiar. But instead of shooting people if they run away, they make green squads more likely to pop into regular. He had a medic, which I thought was interesting in this list. He had a forward observer for artillery. Again, not something you see in a lot of Japanese lists. He backed it up with a Japanese engineer squad, which was veteran with 7 dudes with a flamethrower, and a 15-man bamboo spear fighter squad, which again is green, which the Kempetai can help bump up, and another militia squad. Now, interestingly, this one's only 5 men, so clearly this is probably an objective sitting squad. We have a sniper that's regular. We have a flamethrower team, so there's your second flamethrower. 1 regular suicide AT guy. We have the Type 4 howitzer, and I do love that he splashed out for the extra loaders, because that's actually one of those big slept-on Japanese national rules, is a lot of their artillery, you can give them more guys. And so sometimes those guns can have as many crew as some people trying to assault them, which is, I think, is always wonderful. We also have... what do we have here? We have light truck and a spigot mortar launcher.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. Al, I'm getting a weird notice on here that says that I could be muted. I think that's when I took the picture. I apologize.
That's a screenshot. Yeah.
That's my fault. Sorry, guys. And that is the 15 order dice. What was your experience with this? Did you face this list? Because as a Japanese player, I have lots of things to say.
I faced this list, and what you have to understand about Johnny, he is a cunning player. Yeah. And he, whenever I encounter him in bolt action, he always goes down the path less trodden with whatever army he decides to pick. And some of the trends that he's actually started within our local community, we've, 3-man officer teams are back for whatever officer. If it's like 3-man officer, 3-man commissar, 3-man forward observer, they're back because he's sort of said, no, they're good.
Yeah.
And then we're all trying them out. So they're all making a comeback, and that's all pretty much down to him locally.
That's awesome.
I played obviously I played against him and I won. But there's a lot more to be said about the game than that. As I guess with you having more experience of being a Japanese player, what are your critiques of it? Because Johnny will watch this and he'll want to know. He'll want to know what you think.
Keeping in mind, I tend to play a very different style of Japanese list. I tend to run regular and veteran Japanese lists rather than the inexperienced horde. I tend to play them because I play largely theming my stuff around China, where they're more a traditional army without using suicide AT, because they were doing that against the Americans because they were getting steamrolled, not what they were doing in China. So my experience is slightly different here. But I have run militia hordes in the past. And obviously, if you are going to have green militia troops in your army, you need to have that Kempetai officer there to bump them up. And you need to keep them close. I was fascinated to see a list that had so much inexperienced with a medic. Now, I'm assuming the medic was following the engineer squad around, or was there to possibly talk to the howitzer crew. No. Now that's interesting. Now
the medic followed the bamboo and one of the big militia squads and the officer team around. He was in the thick of it.
That's interesting.
Spoilers.
Do you know
he died?
I was going to say, I'm guessing he didn't last long, but it does give you an interesting idea, though. If you are facing that coming at you, one of the first things I always do or look to do if I'm facing a Japanese horde list is to get rid of the Kempetai officer quick smart. And that's what the sniper is for in my list, is to get rid of that to prevent those green rolls from getting any better, because that hurts to all of a sudden be facing regular or veteran fanatic troops instead of inexperienced.
Yes.
But yeah, it's interesting. I like that it isn't just a wall of bamboo. I also love the inclusion of the engineer squad. I think that you definitely need something with a backbone. And yes, a wall of inexperience that can bump up is a backbone. But it's not one that I like to typically lean on, even though they're fanatic. But that engineer squad is, oof, like that can do some work right there.
That was good.
Mm-hmm. And the spigot launcher and the heavy artillery piece will
Again,
absolutely do some damage.
This tournament was done before that particular FAQ moved the spigot from the mortar to the artillery section, which is why he's got both.
Yeah, I was wondering
and
about
a single
that,
platoon.
but then,
So
yeah,
spigot's a scary thing, mate. It is a scary, scary thing.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a lot of things to look at, and it forces you to make some hard decisions, right?
This is where there's a synergy going on between the spigot, the heavy howitzer, and his artillery observer. He is playing the pin game big time.
Yeah.
And he's right to do so, because if he can land a spigot shot and an artillery shot and a heavy howitzer shot indirect, he'll see units off the table. I mean, because the spigot's D6 plus 2 pins.
Yes.
And that's where, if he gets the big hit, if he's been clever enough to keep his sniper or another easy unit to snap out that last pin, that's a regular squad will disappear. That's the game he's playing, and that tends to be the trend through all the different armies that he plays. Success sometimes, others not so much.
I'm a death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of guy. Like, it's how I run a lot of my lists. And when I run my Japanese, because I tend to be more regular focused, I have the regular rifle squads to throw out some pins, but I follow that up with cheap tanks that have multiple weapon systems, so I can pin sprinkle out. And I'm throwing, some usually a lot of light artillery pieces, usually 2 light artillery pieces. So it's, instead of having the one big gun, I have 2 little ones, and then I back it up because I'm usually running 2 platoons with like 2 medium mortars. So all of a sudden I'm kicking out a lot of possible pins in different places. I really like that artillery observer. I might just need to give that a go, because I think that would synergize nicely with the way I play. And I was taking a good hard look at this list earlier, and I think I'm going to take a few things away and give it a go.
It's a good rounded Japanese list.
I like it. And again, it's not the one that everyone talks about, which is nice to see.
No way. It's good.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about number 4, which was another Soviet platoon. Now, this one is 16 order dice. It has an inexperienced junior lieutenant by himself.
This particular list, this is Jan Petersen from Denmark.
Oh, this is okay. I didn't realize that was his list.
Yep.
Thank you for saying that. We have 2 5-man assault engineer squads. These ones do not have body armor, but they both have a flamethrower, and they both have 2 Panzerfausts. And I think we know where they're going. For those who are paying attention at home, Universal Carriers. We have a Strafbat squad with 6 guys, inexperienced. In fact, we have 3 of those. Again, shirkers. Again, pre-FAQ. We have our free rifle squad. We have a light regular mortar. We have a veteran sniper team. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, where what's going on here? It's all, there aren't, besides the 2 assault engineer flamethrower squads, but they're not with body armor. Where are the teeth here? Well, let's get into the tank hunter squad. That was interesting in that it's larger. It's 4 guys with a Panzerfaust. We have a BA-20, which I thought I was the only person in the world that ran this thing, which is an armored recce car, 7+ armor, and it's a turret-mounted LMG. I use mine in fins, but he had an Su-122, which is the medium. It's like the Soviet Stu. It's a medium howitzer on an assault gun frame. It's not turret mounted, regular at 180 points. We had a Bren carrier with a pintle mounted LMG. Sorry, tongue twist. We had a truck with a machine gun. We have the Gaz Jeep by itself. I'm guessing that is for the flamethrower team. And then we have a Bren carrier again with the forward and pintle mounted LMG. And I should mention that the original Bren that I mentioned had a forward-facing boys anti-tank rifle instead of 2 LMGs. So that made it 10 points more expensive. Now, that is a very interesting list. I may have messed up. I did say there was a flamethrower team there, and there isn't. The 2 flamethrowers are in assault engineer squads. I'm mixing up my notes. Al, talk to me about this list, because I'm getting it jumbled now with the first place one.
Yeah, Jan's again extremely experienced, extremely competent player, and he's a big fan of the assault engineers and the Bren carriers. Mm-hmm. He knows their value. He knows they're good at what they do. I was questioning the SU-1 to whatever number it is, just thinking that if you wanted to take something alternate to that tank. Just because, the vehicle itself has got a big physical footprint.
It does.
But the benefit is that it's a 9+ tank. And I think Jan was counting on, again, that theory that being single platoon, everybody knows they're only going to face one tank, but are they only going to take enough tools to destroy a lighter tank? So he's gone for something a little bit heavier and something that's going to be able to... not destroy. He's not going for a tank destroyer. He's going for an infantry destroying tank.
Exactly.
So if he's going to be dumping out the howitzer shots, those other opposition veteran infantry are just going to melt away from it, which is really good. The 2 Bren carriers, 1 tank rifle. I'm a fan of those. There's a few tweaks that could have been made. That BA-20 is an odd one. Especially within the format of not being able to contest objectives with vehicles. The Gaz Jeep, why is it veteran? I don't get it, because there's nothing really there to deliver.
That's why I got confused, because veteran Gaz Jeep, that makes sense for delivering something like a flamethrower. But in this list, what are you going to deliver? The light mortar? Particularly in a format where, and I don't want to be critical of someone else's list. Clearly, if you have a game plan and I don't see it, then this guy is a very capable player. He came forward.
Oh, yeah.
But I was just thinking, I could see that if you're zipping up. I literally played a game yesterday where my opponent zipped up in a Jeep and parked it next to an objective in turn 6. And I had to deal with that. And in dealing with that, I had to deal with the Jeep first to get to the squad inside. And I was thankfully within assault range, so I was able to do that. But in an event where they're not claiming, I'm wondering if he saw that rule, if that's not something you guys usually do.
100% suspect that Jan has read and understood the player pack completely. So for missions like sectors, this is great. Double envelopment, my goodness. You look at he's only got the single miniature for the lieutenant, and then the light mortar team or the sniper team, barrel them into the Jeep. Woof, off they go, no problem. It's got the truck. The truck, instead of loading up the inexperienced guys, you can load up 2 Shaftbrad and a small team. He's got 6-man Shaftbrad, but you know what I'm trying to say. He's got multiple options on how he builds the transportation abilities of the list to get everything moving. And that's even true of the assault engineers. If he wants to get them up the board quicker, he can dump them both into the truck and then just put the small teams into the Bren carriers to man the guns. That's right. So it's the flexibility of the list. What we're seeing though with the Shaftbrad, and the Soviet list, that's going to melt away now. We will not see that, post FAQ. So this is very much the hurrah for them. I don't know Jan's individual results, but he finished fourth overall. So he's got the wins on the board, and he's been claiming secondary objectives there. So you can't fault it. And again, you look at the list, and it does sit well within the format and within the other lists that we've already discussed.
It does. Now, you mentioned before the SU-22, and it got me thinking. Something that I occasionally talk about on the show is the actual model itself. And I was literally just checking on my phone to make sure that I had the right model. And I actually own a 122 on a shelf behind me. It's the 152 that's a beast. That's the big cat killer that you have a hard time getting cover with sometimes because the model is literally so physically big. The 122 is actually fairly low slung. It's nothing like a Hetzer, for example. But the 122 is nice because you can roll it up to a wall. And because the physical model, the gun's high on it and the model's low, you can actually usually get cover with that thing. So that is actually I think that's a slept on particular feature of that vehicle that I did want to mention, because I personally really rate the SU-122. But yeah, anyway, food for thought.
Look, it's I enjoy seeing the variety of lists, and there's some units in there, that aren't for me, but I know that Jan's experience, again, the player will make the difference to the list, and it has.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad that it did.
Yeah. And please, I'm not being critical of this list at all. I definitely, I am not used to all of the intricacies of the UK meta, and some of these combinations are just things I don't normally see. So I'm glad Al was able to beef it out like that, or explain out how some of these things worked on the day. And did you face this list?
Thankfully not.
Okay.
I'm glad I didn't. Again, I'm not afraid of the list. I'm more afraid of Jan.
Afraid of the player. Yeah. But that's the thing.
He's a cunning guy, and he's such a nice guy. But
it's most often the cases where you see some of the best players turn in a list, and people will say, "I don't get that," and the player just smiles and says, "Okay," and people will say to them, "Don't take that; it can't win games." And then they do very well with it because they've thought it through. They know what it does. And as you say, this list has different varieties that you can reconfigure depending on the mission, depending on the opponent, depending on the situation.
I think we almost faced each other in round 4. And, I said I'm more afraid of the player than I am, but I would have liked to have played Jan. Just because I know the game would have... Well, all my games were extremely enjoyable, but, Jan had flown from Denmark. And I never got to spend much time with him, sadly, but it's... player difference there, mate. Big time. And that's what I would caveat as well about my list, because I know we're about to talk about the games I actually played in super brief generalities. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of them, but... And this is going to sound like I'm blowing my own trumpet here, but I would not recommend this list for a beginner or intermediate player because I properly had to work hard to get the results from it, using it. You know what? If I'd practiced, half a dozen games more, it would have been easier for me. As it was, I only got one practice game with the list going into the event, but it was still hard work.
Well, you also don't run more. I mean, this list wasn't a traditional static gun line, but it had elements of that, right? And that isn't necessarily your regular play style.
No way.
Exactly. So that took some adapting.
Yeah, so I'm more about sort of mobility and reaction, whereas having these 3 fixed pieces, and I mean, let's just dive into it. Round 1 was meet engagement, and my opponent was a nice local player called Dougie. His nickname's Dougie Flames of War, Dougie Fow. He's a long-time gamer. And he had all-veteran American airborne army with, obviously, armor elements and stuff in it. But it was 12 order dice, main engagement. And so already the very first mission, I have to drag those 3 artillery pieces onto the board. And we played on a sort of Mediterranean style table, so there was roads and buildings, and it was all forest. There's forests, so there weren't great lines of sight. But I had to drag these things on, make sure my spotters were well positioned to get decent lines of sight, and then I had to face off against veteran infantry. Lots of them. He had a veteran Sherman. For the life of me, I can't remember which one it was, but obviously it would then come with the gyro stabilized gun. So it was just prowling around. I had some of it contained, with different fire arcs from the howitzers. But the one solid piece of advice using the Romanian 3 howitzer army. 1 gun should be ranging in on something, 1 gun should be direct firing, and 1 gun should be on ambush. You've got to use the 3 guns differently. If you sit there and try and range in with all 3 of them, you'll fire them really quickly, you'll miss, and then your opponent's like, okay, well, that's the danger pass for this turn. I can now maneuver around the battlefield, as much as I want.
Exactly.
But for Dougie, I think my experience in the game paid off a bit more. I just sort of relaxed my way into the game, just chipped away, picked a few kills off. But man of the match was the inexperienced medium mortar that I had. And this was an error on Dougie's part, and I told him, obviously debriefed at the end to make him, give him the feedback, because he outflanked with a veteran Jeep with a veteran flamethrower team. He had a great target. My officer team was hanging out, so a Jeep came on, flamethrower team jumped out, hosed the guys down, 3 officers, dead. And it's like, yep, that's right. And then I had this moment of the mortar was cowering in this building, and I just thought, you know what, let's just throw a Hail Mary. And the 3 inexperienced guys charged the veteran flamer team and killed it. They then consolidated, and at the end of the turn, it popped the Jeep that they arrived in, and that was it. But the cool thing for Dougie was that I told him at the end, is like, there was no move that he did that gave me the feeling of rubbing your hands, going, "Oh, I've got you now." He did solid maneuvers, and it was just a good solid game that I just sort of bled the dice from him as I went on. Game 2. Was against Paul Wiggins and his Soviet army on the Stalingrad table, and we played key positions, which was an unholy nightmare. We rolled 5 objectives. He got to place 3 of them, and he won the dice roll for choosing table side. So all the eggs were in his basket.
Yeah.
And again, key positions, I had to drag those 3 guns on, make sure my spotters were in decent positions, but the table was so tight with terrain that it was pretty much all down to indirect fire. I played a super aggressive game because being 2 extremely experienced players, I said to him at the start, it's like, let's just talk a little bit about the game before we get into it. It's like, I have lost. And I'm not just saying that to sort of psych you out. It's like, I have lost. You have got these objectives. It's a maneuvering, type of mission. I have got limited maneuverability. And he's like, yep. So I said to him, it's like, I am going to go full noise at your face to try and win this, because I might as well, what's the difference between losing a little and losing big? But I could try and win. So we just started slugging it out. And, it's hard to describe, but by turn 2, we were already in each other's face. There was flamethrowers getting shot off in turn 2. I managed to blow his truck up, dump one of the engineer squads out with a single shot Panzerfaust, move and long range, hit on a 5. My flamer missed his veteran engineer unit, but I still shot them. Then in turn 3, everything just failed. It was just the epic amount of dice failures for me. The dice draw
Mm.
was wrong. Everything was failing. His
Mhm.
Stuart was up in my grill, just dumping shots out.
Yeah.
And it was that moment, and we laughed at it then. It was at that moment where a lesser player would have just folded in on themselves and let it go,
Yeah.
whereas I just did not did not let him get it done. There was even a moment where the TO came along and said, "How you guys going?" And Paul, God bless him, it was true at the time. It's like, "Oh, don't worry, it'll be rolled up soon," and he was right to think that. Um,
Mhm.
but I fought on tooth and nail, and I won't get into the boring part of it. My dice came back, his dice fell away. It
Mhm.
swings and roundabouts, but inexperienced medium mortar once again claimed an objective for me and dropped uh, a 6 to hit on one of his engineer squads, ranged in
Mhm.
instantly, killed 2. Next turn, dropped it on a 2, killed the rest of them. So inexperienced medium mortar again,
Yeah.
man of the match.
Love it. Love it, man.
Yeah, but with that loss, mission 3 was then point defense as per the rulebook, and I was
Mhm.
on the jungle runway table. So that
Mm.
that runway was at least 10 inches wide of open ground,
I was gonna
and
say that's a kill ground for your howitzers.
oh yeah, yeah, but only if you're the defender, and I was not the defender. My opponent,
Oh, okay.
my opponent was a gentleman called Max, and he had
Mhm.
a U.S. Army.
Mhm.
So he was defending. He chose to defend. Oh, of course he would.
Yeah.
And with there not being any prep bombardment, all his units didn't have to spend the first turn
Yeah.
shedding pins. So
Mhm.
he had, I think it was at least 3 big blobs of infantry, US infantry with bars and rifles, 2 engineer squads and dodges. He had a Hellcat, pro Hellcat with
Oh,
Reggie.
hell yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, heavy howitzer. Um, so I'm having to come on the board, and he's already got the heavy howitzer on ambush. It's like, oh, give me a break. So
Yeah,
I
I
had
know,
to,
right?
I
The
had,
long tom is scary, yeah.
yeah. So I had to feed him an infantry squad to trigger his ambush on the first turn. Then I rolled my tank on, and I got pure luck. Managed to shoot it off the board. He failed he failed the morale check. Pure luck.
Mhm.
So, but the problem for Max was that I got my spotters were in good positions, dragged the guns on, and then somewhere between sort of turns 2 and 3, I landed 2 indirect 6s on big infantry squads,
Mhm.
and they were clumped, and I killed them, and they failed the morale checks. One of the howitzers managed to catch another infantry blob on an ambush order, hitting on a 5, same effect. I
Yeah.
got the kills, and because they were blobbed up, and they failed the morale check. And then I was just going indirect on he had one infantry squad on a flank, holding one of the objectives, and eventually it ranged in, wiped them out, and then man of the match, the inexperienced medium mortar, who had not fired a single shot, just weaved his way through the jungle, weave,
Mhm.
and he claimed the 2 out of 3. Well, he claimed the second objective I needed to win point defense.
Awesome.
The other
Nice.
the other objective, I had poured engineers and troops and everything in to wipe it out, but this inexperienced medium mortar, pew, and survived the
Dude,
game. So
yeah,
that's 3 games he survived.
people always forget how mobile a medium mortar is, and it's a 3-man team, so it's a small
Yeah, yeah,
3-man squad. And yeah,
yep.
man, love it. The
He
fact that
was.
you're running, see, that's why I always run mine as regular, because I like
Mhm.
to run them out and jump on objectives, or as you did, assault occasionally.
Yeah,
Man, I'm loving this inexperienced medium mortar love that
yeah.
you're throwing down, because
He was
yeah, man, that's how you
absolute
do it.
gun. So,
Yeah.
game 4 was against Johnny Ferg and his Japanese list, and it was in
Hmm.
sectors. At last, I got to deploy the guns. Oh, deploy the medium howitzers. And again, though, with no prep bombardment, I deployed my entire army. And
Hmm.
also because there was no multi-launcher on the other side,
Hmm.
deployed the whole thing. Uh, the ins and outs of the game, it was really nip tuck. But the big critical thing that happened was that his forward artillery observer dropped it right in the guts of my army, killed my officer team, halved infantry team, but it put pins on both the trucks that had engineers in them. It put pins on a artillery piece, and it put pins on the tank.
Yeah.
I
Ouch.
failed. I am sure we did the count. I failed 11 rally checks. 11 rally checks.
Oh, that's
2 on the
bad.
tank, so it was reversing backwards. Both the trucks failed. Both the engineers inside failed twice. So it wasn't until turn 5 when everything started to really sort of fire up for me. And Johnny knew that was just horrific luck. And it's rally orders, on 10 and 9 and 8. It's rally orders.
Particularly against that Japanese list that is dependent on you taking those pins and then not hitting them as they get closer. Like, ouch.
Yeah, it was hard work, but I managed to keep in the game with the other 2 howitzers were still firing. Some of the smaller units were still maneuvering. We won't go into the ins and outs of the battle. It was really, really close. But the inexperienced medium mortar had to duck a sniper shot straight away. Then it ran into hide behind a building. It managed to hit on 2 indirect 6s on one of the militia squads. You're never going to kill a militia squad like that.
No.
But it thinned out the herd a little bit. But then right at the death, it managed to run into his table quarter so it was 3 points towards the win. Inexperienced medium mortar survived again.
Love it. Love it.
And then, so the final game was round 5, and it was double envelopment. Dead set, double envelopment. It's like, you've got to be joking. You have got to be joking. But I got to deploy the 3 howitzers. I was up against a Soviet list run by a gentleman called Phil Mason. Very, very experienced player. And his Soviet list was, multi-gun Stuart, 3 Bren carriers, 2 with engineer squads, 1 with another 5-man veteran submachine gun squad, heavy howitzer. There was a machine gun jeep. There was bomb dogs, sniper, officer, commissar, all the tool.
I'm hearing the greatest hits right there.
Yeah. It's all the good stuff.
Yeah.
All the good stuff. And he's pushing down one flank, I'm pushing up another flank. And look, I only won this game through absolute luck. And I said on 3 separate occasions to Phil, it's like, oh, mate, I'm up against it. I'm going to have to throw a Hail Mary here. And the Hail Mary pass was coming from the howitzer. And the first Hail Mary I threw, it was obviously an indirect shot via a spotter. And he's like, oh, you might have checked the range on that. I'm like, oh, gee, you're right, I better check the range, because it was from literally one end of the table almost to the other. And I was like, I was in by like 2 inches. The max range of a medium howitzer is 60 inches. I was like 58 inches, like, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Winged the Hail Mary and went indirect on one of his Bren carriers. Got it. And I had to throw another couple of Hail Marys, and they were, properly out there. But in the end, double envelopment, we both managed to get 5 units each off the board. The final Hail Mary I threw was against whatever left over. It was like 4 engineers that were left over from whatever combats they'd been in. They were maybe 7 inches from the board edge, and I had a howitzer that had the angle indirect fire on it, and I got them, and I wiped them all out. I clipped the Bren carrier, didn't get it, but the Bren carrier then ended up being 6.5 inches away from another howitzer that only had 2 guys left, and it popped as well at the end of the turn. That was a huge Hail Mary.
Yeah,
but
that would be.
the inexperienced medium mortar on turn 7 managed to run on to the secondary objective and claim it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, he survived all 5 games, and in all 5 games, he achieved things of import. So, best 35 points I've ever spent.
In the olden days of 40K, when we were playing in a lot of events here, I would have expected you to paint some battle armor on battle honors on that Space Marine armor. So maybe those dudes need a little ribbon on their jackets for the next time they play.
Maybe,
Hero
but that
of
was
the Motherland. Yep,
they
right.
were amazing. But like that got me 4 wins and a loss, and that placed me second overall, and it was exceptionally hard fought. There was huge amounts of unluck. You know, that turn against Paul Wickens when I can't describe how much it collapsed. The 11 or so rally checks that all failed against Johnny. It's just, how is that even possible? And then the extreme good luck against Phil, and it was only good luck against Phil and against Max in the point defense that got me those wins. So, you know, it was tough, but the prize pool was quite good. And there were 2 boxes of the new starter set, A Gentleman's War, available for picking up. I actually was very proud of myself when I decided not to pick one of them up, and I went straight for the super special limited edition miniature, the German sniper from Enemy at the Gates, Major Erwin Koenig.
Ed Harris.
Ed Harris, yeah. My wife told me, it's like, so you just got a model of Ed Harris, that's your prize, and just looked at me, he's like, yeah, but it's Ed Harris from Enemy at the Gates.
Exactly, right?
But it also came down to, I wanted that miniature really badly for my Winter German army.
Exactly.
And in the end, if I had to pick up this fancy new box of toys, it would just be greed. I don't need more miniatures. It's just that would be pure greed. Take something you want, and I did. And I'm very thankful.
Man. Well, I want to touch on something you mentioned before, and I'm going to coin the phrase that you used earlier in the episode. It's one of those things that what often makes a great player in bolt action versus a good player in bolt action is knowing that swings and roundabouts are part of the system.
Yep.
And not throwing your toys out of the pram because you've had a bad turn or because a couple of things haven't gone your way. Bolt action is a game that the dice turn, and the dice turn quickly. And as we say on this show all the time, bolt action happens.
Yes,
and
it does.
If you are able to, as you've done in several of your games, hold on tooth and nail to stay in the game, the dice will turn back in your favor. And especially over the course of a 5-game event, really remembering that and not losing your head and starting to feel, because it's easy to feel like you're stepping in quicksand and there's nothing you can do and it's, game over and it's the end of the world. But if you're able to look for those opportunities when things aren't going your way, you can pull yourself out of those situations, and that can make a big difference.
Yeah.
And I think what you've done this weekend is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. One of the key ones, and again, the game against Paul Wickens, was he got his Stuart rolled up and he got the angle on one of my trucks with engineers on it, fired, somehow did not destroy the truck. I think he got like a couple of glances and rolled a 1 and a 2. So the truck was on 3 pins and the engineers were on 3 pins. And I took the chance on, I rallied both of them in the hope of drawing that first dice in the next turn so that I was ready. And I did, and they jumped out, and it was glorious. It was Panzerfaust winging everywhere, flamers just flying out. Oh, yeah, it was solid gold. But I had the head switched on, and I was calm enough to realize it's like, okay, play for the next turn, get ready for it. Clear those pins, and then just sit and pray. And it worked, and it paid off.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Keep your head in the game.
That's it. Well, I think the other big takeaway from this event is, look, I have never been to a Warlord official event on the home soil of the UK. I've only been to them down here. And listening to podcasts, I've heard some criticism of Warlord events in the past, for different reasons. But it sounds like this event, and you are not associated with Warlord, you're a totally independent player. You had a wonderful time at this event. And I hear that this event from other people as well was just a lot of fun and well run.
Yep.
Would you agree with that?
100%. Absolutely. If I were to be told that this event would be repeated next week, I would go. I'd take a different list, but I would go.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Triple Howitzers was good fun, but it's not my play style. And I know that sounds so weird to say. It's like, you got 4 wins and a loss, you finish second. It's like, it was not my play style, and I really, really had to work hard, and luck was more of a factor than anything else, especially in the game against Max. When you wipe out your opponent's 3 out of 4 infantry units, when you've rolled well and he's rolled poorly. And I said to them, it's like, you haven't made any mistakes. And I'm not celebrating what I'm doing, because that was not skill. I've not skillfully beat you here. Just dumb luck has undone you. And that was that.
But taking those lists that are outside of your comfort zone, even though they may be, considered strong by some, taking that and stretching yourself and doing something different makes you a better player, because you then are aware of how those lists run, and you might discover this may actually be my play style. But also, more to the point, it tells you what to do when you're facing them in the future. And it's really cool to see an experienced player like yourself running a list that is counterintuitive to their usual play style as a learning experience, and doing well with it. It's great, man.
Hugely. But yeah, if I had to face my own list, I know what I would do against it.
Right on.
I'm not going to tell you, though. That's for another time.
Exactly. Well, Al, we have been running for a while, and I could talk about both Megatron and the Scottish Open again and again and again for hours. But we should probably let you get to bed. My good man, it is always a pleasure to see your face and to hear your voice and just to talk shop, brother. It has been too long. Please come back again soon, and let's talk bolt action or anything else, because I know we keep threatening to talk Babylon 5 miniature games / Blood Bowl / all sorts of other stuff.
Could we do that?
Right?
Wow.
I think a few people in the audience may have just perked up a little, but yeah.
Wow. Babylon 5 Wars, 2nd edition. Oh my god. We could do it. But Brad, listen, mate, I'm so happy to always come on to your show, onto Cast Dice. CASTDICE.
That's the Facebook page, folks. And if you are looking to request an episode, and this is Al and I talking, coming up with the topic, but people did request on the page that I talk about non-Australian events. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is for you. So this is discussing what it's like in other parts of the world. If you are interested in more event coverage, I know we are talking or have talked to the TO of Sudlich. I know we've talked now, of course, about Megatron and the Scottish Open. And look, we talk about other events all the time. If event coverage isn't your thing, message the page and let us know. If you would like a certain format, if you want more of this, or you want more list discussion, or if you want more discussion of missions, whatever it is, please go to the Cast Dice Facebook page, as Al spelled it out, and message and let us know what you want to hear, because we want you to get what you want from the show. Anyway, I could waffle on, but Al, as always, thank you again for joining us. And folks at home, thank you so much for listening. It is appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, when you are playing the games that we know and love, I hope that your dice roll hot. I hope that your beverages are cold. But more than that, we at Cast Dice hope that you are having fun. Stay safe out there, guys. Good night.